This panel session, as you can see on the board there, is titled Agendas, Agreements and Arbitration, Ensuring Investments Stay Away from Disputes. And we're very fortunate to be joined by four representatives from the mining sector as a whole that will help us sort of talk through some of these issues. We'll just do some very quick introductions. To the very far left is Phil Russo from Harena Resources, who you just heard from. Thanks for staying on, Phil. We look forward to discussing a little bit more about your engagement with the Malayan government. Sitting next to Phil is John Welborn. John is the Managing Director of Fenix Resources, but I think for the purpose of this discussion, John will probably be leaning more on your previous experience in Africa with former companies such as Resolute Mining. Sitting next to John is Rodolphe Ruffié-Farrugia. I'm sure that I've butchered that pronunciation, but we'll get pretty close at least. Rodolphe is the mining partner at K&L Gates. He's based in Perth and is very obviously experienced in Francophone West Africa. And last but not least is Allan Mulligan from Harena Resources. Allan also was previously the Managing Director of Walkabout Resources, a graphite developer in Tanzania. So we'll get underway. Rodolphe, I actually want to start with you because over this past 12 months, we've seen a couple of issues or situations emerge in Mali with the government seeking a greater share of some of the mining projects there. We've seen Guinea repeal licences, and even just in this last week, we've seen some news come out of Burkina Faso with regards to maybe some change of ownership there. I guess I say this somewhat facetiously, but it must be a lawyer's dream.
Well, yes, thank you. Well, thanks very much for that, Michael, and hello, everyone. It's funny because I was having that conversation yesterday with my partner over there, Luke Patterson. It's always a bittersweet situation for me as, first and foremost, a dispute lawyer, because obviously one would think he's a divorce lawyer, he's happy that there is a dispute around. In my experience, though, my clients who are vastly mining and resources companies are the happiest when their project go forward. And as they say, happy client, happy lawyer. So I tend to be a bit happier when I manage to advise them on the project goes forward, or better even, prevent disputes to preserve the economics of the project. Now, perhaps a little bit more on point and to the substance of what has been happening. I'm quite familiar with each of the countries you have described. I have helped some companies lately navigate those challenges. And yes, there are challenges. I think we've heard from the panelists and speakers this morning, including the Honorable Minister for Lands and Resources of Republic of Ghana, that yes, there are difficult discussions, that's for sure. Yes, there are legal challenges, sometimes impediments, paralyzing projects. But what is important, first and foremost, is dialogue. Because in my experience, you don't stay out of disputes by running away from them, by burying your head in the sand. You stay out of dispute by thinking about them, talking about them, and frankly, sometimes even negotiating around them or preparing for them. And why? Well, we've known that for at least 15 plus centuries by now. If you want peace, prepare for war. Not because you want to wage war, but because you want to have the means to fight for peace. So I guess that's my introduction to that topic, and I'm happy to go back in more details about what's been happening.
Fantastic. I think that's a great way to start. And John, I'm going to ask you next. You know, you've obviously, I guess in some ways, been watching some of these issues unfold from afar over the last 12 months. But you know, based on your previous experience, was I guess the threat of arbitration always something that you had to be wary of when you're operating in some of these different jurisdictions?
Well, hopefully not. I think there's, to pick up on Rudolph's analogy to marriage, I think when you're in the throes of the early stage of a love affair, the threat of divorce or arbitration is not in front of mind, perhaps sometimes inappropriately. So, first of all, hello. It's nice to be back here at Africa Down Under. You're correct. You've introduced me as the Executive Chairman of Fenix Resources, and Fenix is successfully developed iron ore mines here in Western Australia, 500 or 600 kilometres to the north of here, and we're exporting 4 million tonnes a year of iron ore out of the port of Geraldton. It's a great example of what this conference tries to champion in Africa. During COVID, when I was stuck back here in Perth, I'd gone to Africa thinking that everything in Western Australia would have been picked up by entrepreneurs for 100 years. So it's really pleasing to actually be reminded that there's opportunities for the resource industry everywhere, even in our backyard here in Western Australia. And one of this conference, and I have championed investment in Africa at this conference over a long period of time. And one of the reasons why the Australia Down Africa, the Down Under conference here, Africa Down Under, is a success is because it's building on not only Australia and Western Australia's particularly enthusiasm for outbound investment, but also our mining pedigree and our mining jurisdiction. And at this conference, we've heard from premiers of Western Australia and ministers of the federal government talking about that pedigree and that history. So to pick up on your question, the rule number one is avoid arbitration. I'm not sure I agree with Rodolphe that we should prepare for war, because often, also, if you look at the centuries you're referring to, almost every time two countries prepare for war, they have war. So there are lots of examples in my career having successfully built mines in Africa. I'd also point out that there are examples in my career where I've been unsuccessful in the attempts to build mines. And I've also got a background as a professional sportsman. I was a rugby player. You need a referee on a sporting field. There's no way two teams at a competitive level can compete in a friendly or competitive game of sport without the umpire or without the referee. So to long answer your question, yes, absolutely. The framework of arbitration is absolutely essential to regulate healthy, constructive arrangements in the resources industry.
Yep, fantastic. Well, Allan, I'll come to you now. Your experience is obviously coming in very early in the piece. You built a career around starting at the exploration stage and taking projects all the way through to development. But typically that can be done over, I think the average age or average timeline there is about 8 to 10 years, A lot can change in that time. How do you sort of approach things at the very beginning, I guess with something in the back of the mind that, the playing field can change somewhere along the way?
Well, hi everyone, thanks Michael. I think for the front end of the process, the low-hanging fruit in mineral exploration always sits with the highest risk. And so if we're willing to go to countries where we know there's possibly going to be change, we've got to accept that the risk is going to be a little bit higher, and very often our investors know that. However, once you've made a discovery, that's when you need to cement the terms down. And the earlier that we can get to some sort of a fixed agreement about what we're going to do with government and the local communities, because it's all about community as well, the more comfortable they feel with us operating. I think these changes, a lot of them are happening as a result of the boom times in gold. And so the governments are seeing the companies having a very big boom period and making a lot of money, but we must realize it's taken years of investment and effort and input to get there. So it all spreads out over the time, and I think that the benefits to the country will always be measured and always be seen.
Fantastic. All right, thank you, Allan. I think it's probably good time now to turn to Phil on the end there. Phil's obviously just gone through the process of agreeing, the government share and company share of a project. Phil, can you talk us through that process a little bit more, just on top of your presentation, in terms of how you ensured doing a deal that was going to meet, I guess, the best interests of all parties?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So, look, for us, we had the benefit of seeing the other companies, the other producers and what they were going through. So we read the tea leaves of where the trend was going, and as a company, we take a really long-term view. I know We've got near-term, if people want to measure you by the share price being up in a month. We're taking long-term, multi-year views. So for us, the terms that Marley put forward, a question we asked ourselves was, can we live it or does it kill the project? Can we live with it or does it kill the project? And if it doesn't kill the project and there's still significant value for all our stakeholders, including our shareholders, then we basically adopted it and moved on. So we tried to limit the issues that we have with Marley to only really a couple of points. And I say today, there's nothing in front of us with Marley that's a showstopper. We're really just working through it. So, but you've got to think outside the box, is what we've found. I'm spending way too much time talking to lawyers lately, and so that's not the best use of my time. So, but we're coming at it from not just a legal perspective, but just pragmatism, if I'm going to be frank, and that is, how do we make this project come to life? Because there's more risk stalling and arguing and sitting on it than to move it forward, and that's how we did it. And I know people freak out a bit when they see the level of interest that Marley's taking in a project, but there's a trend going around West Africa where they all just want a bigger piece of the pie. And so we looked at it as like, well, how do we make this pie bigger? So that way it doesn't destroy our value and they're invested. And I think we're navigating our path there.
Fantastic. Well, just sticking with you, Phil, as well there. I've spoken to you a few times over the last sort of 9 months or so since you've been getting this agreement in place. And I guess while there has been some negative press around Barrick's engagement with Marley, you've talked about it, but nothing but positive. I'm not asking you to compare apples and oranges here, but what have you done differently to keep those discussions and conversations moving forward?
Yeah, so everyone runs their own race in Marley. I can just only speak from our perspective. And again, when you read the headlines, what we lean back on is our channels in country. What are the ministers, what are their advisors telling us? So we don't, again, react to every news that's happening to our peers. There's some specific issues going on with some of our peers there. They've got to make their own decisions. We just navigate it for ourselves. So, that's how it's not easy. It's not meant to be easy to bring a mine to life. So, so our discussions with government aren't all, throwing a party, but we try to be pragmatic and navigate our way through it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Phil. And Rodolphe, if I can come back to you, Phil obviously spoke there about, all the different parties wanting to get as big a slice of the pie as possible. I guess at the end of the day, it's a fairly arbitrage sort of thing to sort of work out where the number is. Where should discussions be directed so that you do try and, where possible, to keep all parties happy?
Yes, thanks for the follow-up, Michael. And I think to answer your question, I'd like to go back to the expression I used and on which John jumped very voraciously, I should say. Preparing for war is exactly, for instance, what Phil did with Tubiani when he said, look, we took the initiative to engage with the government to try to avoid that kind of scenario where we enter into a dispute or we dragged into a discussion that we didn't want to have. Preparing for war means you need to think about the potential disputes or difficulties ahead of time. And frankly, the law is only but one aspect of that game. Only but one aspect. In fact, a lot of the time I spend is much less about the law, much more about commercial strategy, discussing with clients the pros and cons of several approaches. And I think, again, nothing really replaces first and foremost discussions. I've said that already. In-country discussions, directly with the government and, if possible, with the highest ranking stakeholders in the government to be able to get to a decision maker, because at the end of the day, a lot of the time, those problems that start small, sometimes unbeknownst to the miner and the government in presence, they tend to fester, and become huge because, in fact, the single person or couple of persons in the government who actually have the power to make decisions on those projects in dispute are not directly involved in those discussions, right? So how do you arbitrage between, keep going with just a discussion or going one step beyond and maybe start triggering a legal process? Well, I love to give a usual lawyer answer to this is it depends, right? And I think the answer is it depends, and because it's going to depend every single time, right? You should not spare on menial expenses at the pre-litigation stage, because in my experience also, it is when you wait for the problem to be a problem and explode to your face that is the costliest to resolve, right? And so I often tell clients, if you don't want to see me later, better see me now just for 5 minutes. And I think the key is really to be able to conjugate your commercial objectives with a legal strategy just as backup in the background, so that you always have all doors open at any given time. Even if that door you want to go through is a legal process, maybe you don't have to go through it, but you know it exists and you know how it would go down if you had to cross that door, right? That's the message.
Thanks. So, John, as Rodolphe just pointed out there, it's always having a backup strategy. Is that something that you've always had in I guess in the back pocket in the companies that you've run for I guess if some of these situations change unexpectedly?
Yes, of course. It's like mining, it's a risk game, and so we always have to look at other opportunities. And look, Rudolph, I actually agree with your sentiments around the need for preparation. And I think I was just following from James Wallbank's presentation and thought a little bit of tension in the room when we're talking about arbitration's quite good in relation to having different points of view, which is the whole need for arbitration. Yes, I think there's always value in preparing. Capital is mobile. One of the key points, again, that this conference has always championed is the fact that good projects will attract the right capital. Good locations is the same issue, and jurisdiction has always been a topic of debate in allocating capital, and particularly in the African Down Under environment. And I think we're seeing that. We're seeing, even in a high gold price environment, one of the other themes of this conference is that a similarity between Western Australia and the whole continent of Africa is how both jurisdictions have been gifted enormous endowment of valuable minerals, and particularly increasingly what is now called strategic minerals. Regardless of that endowment, capital and expertise will flow a lot quicker to jurisdictions that have the right environment and the right mining codes and the right stability. But equally also, where jurisdictions, that doesn't mean that you don't have disputes and that there aren't, from time to time, the need for a referee, an umpire, an arbitrator to solve that issue. And as well as having a great and stable environment as we have here in Western Australia, I think there's a great opportunity for African jurisdictions to show that arbitration can also resolve complaints. And so that is about preparation on both sides. The mining codes, the presentation of those, the refinement of them, although that might be frustrating for capital providers and miners, the reality is there are reasons why mining codes develop and jurisdictions change, and we have to be able to act on them. And the other point of view is it's not just the case of the credibility of miners complaining about rogue states and arbitrating against perceptions and sometimes the reality of illegal actions. There's also the responsibility of the miners and the mining industry and the capital providers to be responsible and to genuinely, as Phil was describing, have somewhat of a holistic approach about community benefits, capital benefits, and understanding the needs and requirements of government.
Well, Phil, I'll just quickly turn to you then. You're obviously in the process of raising capital to develop your mine over in Mali. Is the discussion around political risk and I guess the goalposts changing somewhere along the way, has that been raised in any of your discussions with, I guess, the potential key finance providers that you're talking to?
To draw on John's point, good projects will attract capital. it might cost a bit more today. But given that Kubata's not looking for $1 billion, it's not looking for 500 million, it's more or less 200 million, we think that's executable, and there is a broader audience, like the credit funds and those types of guys. They're risk adverse when it comes to current sort of geopolitical headwinds, but there is another tier of banks that you can compile together to put that funding together. But it's there, the political risk insurance component of it, we're still working on. We haven't really made any decisions there. But if you've got a good project, I still believe you can find a way to do it.
Excellent, fantastic. Well, Allan, I'm just going to come back to you and perhaps lean on your experience in Tanzania with Walkabout. You were on the cusp of pulling the trigger on development when there was changes announced to the mining code in Tanzania. I guess, how did you sort of put a plan together to make sure that a project which you knew would come together because all the economics stood up, but when the mining code changed, how did you approach that?
Well, the most frustrating part of that process was the moratorium. Now, very often when changes are considered by governments, they first put a moratorium on the status quo. And when that happens, we all stop and wait, because investors don't want to spend money until they know what the next stage of regulatory process is going to be. So in Tanzania, we had a standout for almost 2 years, 18 months and more. And I know that there have been many more. In Botswana, we once had one for 12 or 16 months. So my message to governments is, if you're going to change the rules, do it quickly, and perhaps have different rules for different stages of development. The exploration industry is a high-risk industry, and very often we go through a lot of pain to spend money to find nothing. And I think that doesn't mean it's valueless. Everyone then knows there's nothing there, and that investment is then warranted. But in order for that company to get there and to make that investment, it needs to have a longer-term view of what the prospects for economic realization might be. And at the end of the day, it comes down to partnerships. Our view in Tanzania at the time was, we'll form a partnership with government because that's what they want. Their 16% free carry was doable, and many companies are still active there with that in place. So it's about government just becoming and saying, we want to be involved in your mining industry as a partner, but we won't get in the way.
Fantastic. All right, we'll throw it open to the audience shortly for questions. So start to put those together, and we'll get a microphone to you shortly. But just, Rodolphe, if I can come back to you, you know, I guess there's a saying in some ways that arbitration should only be used as a last resort. You know, I guess, is that the best legal advice that someone in your position could offer, or is there a different way to approach it?
Well, I won't give you, again, the "it depends" answer. I would bore everyone to death with that. So the answer really is, in my view at least, arbitration is like a nuclear arsenal. You build it out in the background. You know it's big. You know there is that red hot button ready to be pressed at any time, but the goal is to never press it. Now, I say that because by now it is well known to I'm sure at least some of you, that international arbitration has become the main means of dispute resolution when it gets to big international mining projects, right? And access to arbitration exists not only in contracts, mining conventions you may have with the government, but also through a huge network of investment treaties. There are about 3,000 of them in the world that are active by now. They're completely free. They marry themselves well with political insurances. And what that means is that if you structure your company structure appropriately, you might be able to avail for free the benefits of those investment treaties. And frankly, those investment treaties, in the eyes of financier lending institutions, they act as additional investment protection guarantees in and of themselves. So The difference, though, between arbitration and the nuclear bomb is this. Nuclear bomb, once you press the red hot button, it's over, right? And you know that, and that's why, thank God, we've managed to avoid that for the past 80 years by now. Conversely, arbitration, it's a multi-layered, step-by-step process, meaning even when you start pressing the red hot button, you don't need to go through with the process in its entirety. You can take it step by step, and the goal of taking it step by step is to encourage, right, the other party to come back to the negotiation table to try to stop the process that is being put into motion. So that's what I can say about arbitration. And again, it's more about creating an atmosphere where we don't need to go that far, as opposed to trying as much as possible to launch that process for the pure purpose of launching a dispute and a legal process when it can be avoided, really.
Excellent. And John, just one last one for you, and I understand you may be not in a position to answer this in its entirety, but you obviously have been involved in an arbitration process with one of your companies, Equatorial Resources. Was it like that? It was literally like, you push that red button and once it's over?
Well, I'll take some advice from Rodolphe on the panel about listening to your lawyer and getting prepared. So fortunately, I'm accompanied here by Kate Apostolova and Elliot Luke from Clifford Chance, and they've told me not to make any comment about the arbitration process that's ongoing. However, I will talk about operating in Africa, and what we've already seen this morning is the frustration on both sides, from James representing Azuma and from the Honourable Minister from Ghana saying, well, don't judge us on one case and this is the referee, and versions of what even anyone's here in the room have heard. And also, I have some affinity for James's frustration about the fact, I love building mines. I think it's just such an inspiring industry. At Fenix, we've created 300 jobs. We raised $15 million of equity 5 years ago from the market. We haven't raised any more money since. And we've generated $1 billion of revenue, all the sort of social benefits, community benefits, shareholder benefits, state government of Western Australia benefits. We paid tens of millions of dollars of royalty. We pay taxes to the federal government. That's what really excites me about the mining industry. It's why we're all here. So we've got to avoid arbitration from both sides to get to the point of the point. I mean, Equatorial has... I would love to be building iron ore mines for Equatorial. We have some really exciting tenements in Guinea, and it was a great privilege of mine to have dinner last night at the dinner with the Honourable Minister for Guinea. And we are ready to make investments there. And we look forward to the clarity around that jurisdiction, the licensing and the regimes, and hopefully that's an example where all of us can avoid any need for arbitration and get ahead with creating jobs, creating those sort of social benefits, as well as creating the economic ones. So I would, to answer your question directly, but also make sure that my friends at Clifford Chance aren't panicking or rolling over or rushing up or creating a diversion. I would say that I agree with everyone that arbitration is best avoided. Sometimes we need the outcome of the referee, but the ultimate goal is as quickly and as possible and as capital efficiently as possible to actually do what we all love and what actually justifies this conference and all of our efforts and endeavour, which is to build and operate mines that produce commodities the world needs.
Fantastic, and I guess as a journalist I can say to the lawyers that that's a much better answer than no comment. All right, do we have time, I think, for the questions from the audience? It looks like Kate's got a comment here, or maybe hopefully a question. If we can get a mic just to Kate here in the middle aisle.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Apostolova from Clifford Chance. I actually just wanted to thank John for listening to his lawyers. Thank you very much, John. But also to emphasize the protection of investment treaties that mining companies should look for and try to get. And unfortunately, Australian mining companies are not protected because Australia doesn't want to sign any treaties with African states. So you do have to be proactive about structuring so you can get that protection. And it was very encouraging yesterday during the opening session when the High Commissioner of Zambia said that African states, Zambia in particular, are ready to sign those kinds of treaties. And I encourage, unfortunately, we weren't very successful in lobbying the Australian government to sign those treaties with African states. But if the African states themselves can approach government officials from Australia and start that conversation as well, I think that will be very helpful for Australian mining companies and for African states as well. Thank you.
Yeah, look, I'll pick up on that point. I've raised hundreds of millions of dollars in debt and equity for African mining projects. And when you're getting fund managers like BlackRock or JP Morgan or M&G to put equity at risk in your project, or when you're talking to a consortium of banks about putting hundreds of millions of dollars of debt facilities together, being able to describe the structure of your company, its access to tax treaties and bilateral trade agreement treaty support has been very important in being able to, it's a really important part of this discussion, is although good projects will raise finance, it's a hell of a lot more difficult to convince someone to give you equity or debt for a difficult project on the dark side of the moon that requires a rocket ship to get to and is unstable or balanced on the unstable ground. So the stability of the jurisdiction, the availability of treaties, the structure of the company, access to good legal support is really important in actually getting ahead with the positive activity of deploying capital and therefore building mines, as opposed to the need to press Rudolph's big red ugly button.
Fantastic. Do we have any more questions from the audience? Don't be shy. Oh, here we are, just over here. If you could just introduce yourself as well to the panelists first, thank you.
Hi, this is Sierra, Equity and Inclusion Advocate. So my question is to John. You did mention creating 300 over jobs. So which of these include people of diverse ability, both in Australia and Africa? And if there is not, are you open to facilitation of that?
We obviously operate three core businesses at Fenix. Just to answer the question quickly, we have a mining business. We're operating 3 mines in Western Australia, iron ore mines. We have a road haulage logistics business, which with vast number of drivers we employ there work for 12-hour shifts driving road trains, these amazing 60-metre long quad road trains. And then we have a port business, and that's all supported by an office team. And so we have got a lot of legal support for diversity and special needs people in Western Australia. So I don't know off the top of my head the actual statistics, or obviously there's a lot of those jobs that are not suitable, but there are a lot of our jobs in administration and support which they are. And we are always championing and looking for a diverse workforce. Here in Western Australia, we would not and do not discriminate if we're looking for a role. We employ the best person we can find, but in recruiting the best person we can find, we're always looking for diversity, and that often is a euphemism for gender diversity in Western Australia. But to pick up on the actual point of your question, it's a lot broader than that, and we really encourage the opportunity to employ diversity across our workforce.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? No? In that case, I've got one more actually I was just going to ask Allan. So one of the companies from Tanzania, Harena Resources, did actually go through an arbitration process and took that all the way through the various courts and were paid out a sum. Was that a win for the mining industry in Tanzania to have a result like that?
Well, it was a win for the investors in Indiana, I'm sure. But for the rest of the operators, we don't think so. Mostly because it's left a bad taste. In arbitration, I mean, it's still a case of someone wins it and someone loses it. So there's always going to be bitterness if you've been through the arbitration process. I must commend Tanzania for going through the international arbitration process, because the previous Prime Minister, Magufuli, declared that he would not allow that and he would not be having international arbitration. So that is what happened. I don't know the details fully, but I do, having been there recently in the industry, I am feeling some sort of animosity about it, but I'm sure it'll settle.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you for that insight there. And just lastly, obviously, to Phil, I was going to ask a similar sort of question. Is your agreement with the Malian government, and I also know that Robex Resources, who'll be presenting in the next session, have also done a similar agreement with the government authorities there. Have, I guess, the positive results that you've been able to achieve from those negotiations, have they been seen by a win by, I guess, the local operators in Mali?
Oh, sorry, what do you mean by the local operators?
So the companies that are operating in Mali, you and your
You know,
peers.
it's interesting, when you say we had a win, we're just complying with the code. So I don't know if that's a win. Like, we're just, it's just normal course. This is what you have to do to operate in the country. They want you on the mining code. So call that a win, I guess, but for us, that they're the rules of engagement, and that's what we do.
Okay, fantastic. All right. Were there any more questions just to conclude this panel? No? Fantastic. All right. If you could please thank our panellists for that great discussion.